Today on a special rambling about cars, Porsche Cayenne, Volkswagen ID7, Lincoln Nautilus. These are just some of the vehicles we're going to talk about that debuted earlier this week. Auto Shanghai, big show going on in China, bigger than I think we were expecting. And we have a very special, very rad guest that's going to help us through all of this craziness. So let's roll. It's podcast time. I am Christopher Smith. It's always a pleasure across the way to introduce co-host Mr. Chris Bruce, and we do have a very special guest with us today.
We sure do. And this is a very chaotic episode, not only because dogs barking behind me, but also because we've got a first-time guest on the show.
Yes.
So, Ethan, I will be totally honest with you. Brad Hansen recommended you to be on the show. He's been on twice now, and he said you'd be an awesome person to have on the show. So I reached out to you, and so we're going to have you on. And for anyone out there who doesn't know, Brad Hansen, so Ethan Tufts is, he runs the Hello Road YouTube channel. He's also a musician, and he's also a very talented photographer if you look at his Instagram page. So you're a man of many talents. So I really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me. Yeah,
and Ethan, awesome. I mean, as we're waiting for some of the viewers to come in here, I mean, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us just a little bit of background here, what you got going on. Your YouTube channel is filled with great automotive content, by the way. You need to go to Hello Road on YouTube. Great stuff. I mean, like Radwood stuff. Well, you have a lot of Radwood cars.
I do. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, like a few years ago, I just decided, you know what? I want to be involved with the automotive space. I was like, okay, YouTube channel is the way to go. And I've always been a huge fan of cars from the 80s and the 90s. That's the cars I've always gravitated to. It's what I grew up with. I've got a bunch of stuff in my yard, some running, some not. But yeah, I generally tend to focus on cars from that era on my channel. I do some new car reviews too, and I do some road trips and that kind of thing. But mainly my collection of misfit cars from the 80s and 90s.
I love how you say misfit, and we're probably maybe jumping ahead a little bit because
we can get to
talk
that.
all about your stuff later. But I was watching one of your videos that I absolutely want to talk about, that I think it's great for us as well as the listeners. Your video from several months ago about how you're like falling out of love with cars, and it's super insightful, and it shows, I think it shows an aspect of this hobby, this passion that people have that everybody experiences, and maybe they don't really talk about it that much because maybe they're afraid of what. Anyways, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Super excited to have you here.
Excited to be on.
And once again, if you're listening on YouTube, Motor One on YouTube, Motor One Com on Facebook, Motor One Com on Twitter. We are live. You can comment. You can type your comments, whatever you want to say. You are part of the Rambling About Cars cast. You can type up your comments. They will come to us in real time. We can chat. We can respond. We can do all of this stuff in real time. So again, Motor One on YouTube, Motor One Com on Facebook, Motor One Com on Twitter. And if you don't happen to catch us live, you can always go back to Motor One's YouTube page, where we have all of the Rambling About Cars episodes that we welcome your comments on. And you can always email us still at podcast@motorone.com. And we do love to get those emails, and we do love to read and share them on the air. So I think we're about ready to talk about some new vehicles here.
I think we are. So we are going to start with a Porsche, and Ethan, we are going to be talking about a Porsche you owned later because you owned one of my dream cars and sold it. From a video from about 4 months ago. I think that you will know what that means. I don't know if our listeners will all know what that means.
I've only owned one Porsche, so I know what that means.
Okay.
We'll get to it.
One of my absolute dream cars, so we will be talking about that. But before we get into that classic Porsche that I love so much, let's talk about the newly refreshed Porsche Cayenne. I'm going to pull some photos up of that now.
The refresh on the outside, I mean, while you're pulling that up, I'll just give a little filler. There is a refresh on the outside. It's really minor. What really got me was the changes they did inside. But let's talk about the exterior first. I mean, if you're familiar with the Porsche Cayenne, guess what? It still looks like the Porsche Cayenne.
Porsche says they changed the headlights and the hood. You kind of need to be a Porsche aficionado to see that. Like the change, there are changes there. There are certainly differences. The differences are very minor, though. Like,
I mean, we've got some updated tail lights. The tail lights are just a little bit different. The bar going across there is a little bit different.
A little bit.
It's really minor up front. Those vents, those lower vents, corner vents up front. I think there's an extra flap in there, and I think things maybe they just have it a little more symmetrical. But we're talking very, very minor changes on the outside. But I mean, it's Porsche, right? Would you not? I mean, isn't Porsche known for very, very subtle updates, right?
They are, and they certainly are. And what we're going to be seeing here in a moment, as folks watching on YouTube will see, the changes on the inside are far more radical than the changes on the outside. Inside, so it now has, the Cayenne now has a fully digital instrument cluster. Previously, they kept the analog tack, and then the other instruments were digital. Now everything is digital.
That's a big change. That's a big change here.
They made some small tweaks to the center, the infotainment screen. There's now an angled display on the center console, which is where the HVAC controls are. So there's a mix of physical buttons and some haptic controls. And taking a note out of the Take Hands playbook, you can get as an option a screen on the passenger side. So just a completely different look when you're looking at the dashboard versus the current model.
Right. They clearly spent more time on the inside of this than the outside. And I mean, I'm not going to sit here and preach aesthetics. It's all in the eye of the beholder. I don't think the Cayenne has ever been the most attractive high performance SUV out there, but there's no doubt that it's one of the highest high performance that you can get. And I think we're going to talk about that here in a moment with the powertrain updates, because this is a bit surprising to me for what's technically a mid-cycle refresh. The exterior, okay, that seems on par with Porsche for mid-cycle. The interior work and the powertrain changes are pretty substantial.
Yeah. So all of the powertrains get an upgrade, regardless of what model you're choosing from. So even the base, the turbocharged 3-liter V6, that now makes 348 horsepower. That's a increase of 13 horsepower. The e-hybrid, which is the plug-in hybrid that you'll be seeing in some of these pictures, it now has a more powerful electric motor. So you're getting a total output of 463 horsepower, which is 8 horsepower more than before. Plus you get a larger battery. The battery is now 25.9 kilowatt hours versus 17.9 kilowatt hours before. Porsche has not yet told us what kind of range increases you can expect from that, but with what is that? That's a decent upgrade. We will certainly expect it to go farther on pure electric range. Cayenne S, now previously it used the turbocharged V6, a hotter version of that. Now you get the twin turbocharged 4-liter V8.
That's a big change. Oh my God.
So that makes 468 horsepower. And at the absolute top of the range, you get, it still uses the 4-liter twin turbocharged V8. Sorry, I almost said V6. That now makes 650 horsepower. Which is a 19 horsepower bump than before.
And that's the GT turbo coupe, which
turbo GT,
the coupe turbo GT, which every time I hear that, I think Thunderbird turbo coupe, because I'm such a nerd like that. But
real quick, I want to say this, how absurdly expensive the Cayenne coupe turbo GT, the range topper is. If you want one of those, after the destination fee, it is $197,950.
And the next step down though is what, like 115 or something? So I mean, there's like,
no, it's even less than that. It's 103,750.
Almost
you can
twice
have
as much money.
Yeah.
It's, put it this way, you can have a Cayenne S coupe and a dead base Cayenne for less than the cost of the turbo GT.
But in Porsche's
and
defense,
have money left over.
In Porsche's defense, that Turbo GT is, I would need to go back and check my fastest SUVs for 2023 list. We were talking about it on the podcast last week. If you want to go back to Motor One YouTube and see last week's podcast, you can get a little bit about that. This, if it's not at the top, it's like number 2 for the world's fastest combustion powered SUV, because it's 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds with that 650 horsepower engine. It's right there at the top. So I mean, yeah, you're paying a lot for it, but you're getting a lot. It's competing right there with the Aston Martin DBX 707, which I think has more power, and I think it's just a little bit quicker to 60. But I mean, it's just smoking.
What I want to know is, somebody's paying $200,000 for a Cayenne. You know, maybe they don't really care about depreciation because they have a ton of money, but it does seem like that's not kind of. I mean, Cayennes, you can get a pretty nice Cayenne, used Cayenne, for quite a bit less than what it was new.
Right.
Where you expect that this is going to just tank as soon as it leaves the dealer lot.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't. That's a good question, because I mean, this range topping version, the GT, the turbo, I don't think it's really been out for more than what, I think about 3 or 4 years at this point, Bruce. I think
3 is the number in my mind.
Somewhere around there. So I mean, we haven't really had a chance to see how far they're going to drop.
Yeah.
And the performance is just insane for what you're getting out of this SUV. But you're right. I mean, gosh, you can go back and I think get like, you know, a 10 or 15-year-old Cayenne for 10 grand, maybe somewhere around there.
Yeah. I was looking. Yeah.
Very early one.
Yeah.
I mean, they've even become a little bit popular in the overlanding crowd. It's like,
yes,
who wants to go overlanding with a Porsche? You know, you can find this cheap Cayenne with a V8 and just go for it.
I will say they're pretty good off road. I was towed by one when my Subaru got stuck when I was doing the Gambler 500. I was towed out by a Cayenne. So
what Subaru did you have?
I had a 98.
And I are both Subaru owners.
Yeah, I'm not anymore. I had a out. It wasn't an Outback. It was just a Legacy that I lifted. But yeah, those Cayennes can be pretty capable.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, and we do have some comments coming in. Let me decide. I know, Bruce, you tossed this one up here. EKG Canadian, thanks for coming back and joining us. Porsche Cayenne is better than the Urus. I mean, they use the same engines, and Porsche people who buy the GT Turbo don't care about money. Exactly. I will say I would take this over the Urus. I would take this over the Urus.
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't look ridiculous. It's, you know, I guess it depends on what your personality is too. If you want to be out there and have everybody look at you, great. But if this is something you want to have the performance, but you don't really, you want to blend in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the Turbo GT, that looks pretty aggressive.
Well, no, that one specifically that we're looking at now, that one has a bunch of options here. I'm gonna go back to that. It's got like the stripes.
Yeah, that one obviously you don't want to blend in for sure.
That's how I'd have it though. If I'm spending $197,000 for the Cayenne for the range topping Turbo GT.
But wait,
I'm going to spend another 80 grand in Porsche options and get the stripes and the wheels and everything, right?
I just want to point out here, this is a Turbo GT, and then I'm going to go back several photos here, and you're going to see another Turbo GT, and this is also a Turbo GT. Now, granted, this one has the blue wheels, but it's still far, far less eye-catching. Like
it's far less eye-catching, but I mean, the front, the fascia is a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
You got the little wing back there. It's cool. It's cool. I mean, I've never really liked the look of the Cayenne, but I've never really hated it either. But it's still probably the one that I would have. It's the one I would have. Listeners out there, all you ramblers, which one would you have? Would you take the Porsche Cayenne GT? Would you take the Aston Martin DBX 707, the Urus? Insert your choice fast SUV
Cullinan,
here. Jump into the comments and let us know. We can circle back to this one, but we've got some other debuts to talk about, Bruce.
We do. I guess we're done with Porsche time then for now.
What do you want to move on to next here? We've got. You want to talk about ID7? You want to keep it in the fam?
I was going to talk about the Lexus next.
You want to keep it?
I want to talk about the Lexus too. The Lexus is cool.
Oh, do we have to talk about the Lexus?
Come on, man. Vans are rad.
Okay, just for everybody watching live, or if you're not watching live, just prepare yourself because we've got the Lexus LM coming at you right now.
Which it's not a new vehicle. This is a refresh for the current Lexus LM. And it somehow got even uglier.
Damn. For those who don't know, the Lexus LM, this is a minivan sold in China, but now we have the refresh that has debuted, and now it's going to be sold in other markets around the world, Japan, Europe, not coming to North America, at least not right now. Minivans are pretty much dead in the water here, so I wouldn't expect
it to show up. But it's not really a minivan. See, I think
first it's a
misnomer. No,
it's got sliding doors. It's like it's the most minivan of minivans because it has the sliding doors. It has the shape.
I think we should just embrace the van. Here's the thing. SUVs. I think that Cayenne GT is way more dorky than this minivan because everybody drives SUVs now. Minivans are going to be like the kind of cool thing. I don't really believe that. That's just kind of like me wanting that to be true because they're so much more useful than SUVs. But
they totally are. They totally are.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Every single soccer mom is driving an SUV, so those are becoming uncool. Minivans are going to have a resurgence. I mean, they're not, but I want it to be.
I mean, give it another 5 or 10 years, and I think it'll be like station wagons. Station wagons are cool as hell right now, and you can still get some if you really want one. Minivans, I think, will go that way. But I mean, we just need to stop for a moment, okay, gentlemen. We need to stop for a moment, and talk about that grill.
For a moment. Oh,
that grill.
It is a Lexus.
Cow catcher.
So...
Yeah, but I mean, that looks like. I mean, that's like the spindle grill. If the spindle, we're talking like King Kong spindle.
It looks like the front of a locomotive.
Yes, it's the angry. What is that? Wasn't that movie about the toaster? Oh, geez.
The Brave Little Toaster?
The Brave Little Toaster, yes. I was thinking the Angry Little Toaster. It's kind of like that. It's the Angry Little Toaster.
It's the Angry Little Toaster. Jay Ferrari 427 says it looks like a block of cheese.
It's a cheese grater. Oh my gosh. It's more egregious than the LX 570 grill.
It does look like a sort of a cheese grater.
Yeah.
And as I'm looking at it from this angle, it's like it looks like a character from Star Wars, and I can't think of his name, where it's just got like the narrower eyes with like the big gruffy chin. But maybe it's another sci-fi show. I'll say this. It's sort of a sci-fi look. And I was showing my family pictures of this earlier. I said, hey, we're going to be talking about the Lexus LM tonight. And at first they were like, come on, that's not real. It's like, no,
this is like AI generated Lexus van.
Now we're spending time talking about the outside, but yeah, Bruce, you're pulling up some interior pictures. Tell us about the interior here a little bit.
Let's address the interior for a second. You get for the LM, for like the top luxury version, a 47-inch screen. I just want to put this into perspective in the back. Yes, for the rear passengers. I just want to put this into perspective. I'm pretty sure the first television my parents ever bought me was 13 inches.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And this would have been in the very early, this was like 92, 93, something like that. So this minivan, quote unquote, has a giant screen in the back. I don't know if my first 1080 screen might have been 42 inches, which is still right around here.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when if you had like a 26 or 27-inch TV in the living room, that was pretty rich. Cool. You had a pretty big console TV, and that was a pretty cool thing. Lexus puts this in the back. There's a neat center partition that separates the front seats from the rear. And Lexus says, you can use this for entertainment, but also the bill it has something to use for maybe a mobile office. Where you can have like Zoom conferences, things like that, mobile office in the back. 6 or 7 passenger seating is available. And I mean, it's a Lexus. It's going to have a lot of cool features in it. One thing that I noticed from the back, that partition actually has infrared sensors in it. Did you catch this part, Bruce? It has infrared.
I think I might have missed this part.
It has infrared sensors in there that can detect like a person sitting there. It can look at your face and figure out, okay, how warm is your face? How warm is your body?
Okay.
How warm is your arms and legs? And then it can also detect, okay, how warm are the windows, the various surfaces in the van. It'll crunch all of those numbers and then automatically adjust the climate control to a temperature that presumably the van thinks is suitable. But the fact that it's using all of these infrared sensors to get temperature readings from the person and then the person's surroundings, I mean, it's kind of a neat feature. Presumably you would be comfortable all of the time without having to do a single thing.
Yeah.
It's got 64 ambient lighting options, so you can kick back and relax in the back of that van. We mentioned the 3-row seating, 6 or 7
right.
seats.
So here's the 3-row version. So earlier images showed the 2-row version, which is just, front, basically a chauffeur and then 2 people in the back. But you can get this as kind of a standard minivan, quote unquote, configuration as well.
And EKG Canadian, you were asking about the LM last week, I think. So we're happy to have you back. Lexus LM is an ultra luxurious minivan, better than any full-size luxury SUV. It is a luxury limo minivan. We are certainly seeing it that way. And I guess when you're inside, like relaxing with a 48-inch screen, what aren't you looking at? The grill. So
yeah,
it's a non-issue at that point, right?
Well, once you step inside, what it looks like on the outside, then it might be ugly, is kind of a moot point.
Powertrain wise, we don't know that much about it. Lexus didn't release that much information. We know there's a 2.4 liter turbo hybrid or a 2.5 liter hybrid. That's all we know, unfortunately, for powertrain. We don't have any other information on pricing or availability, but it's not coming to North America, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side of the coin you're on. I'm still a fan of minivans. Ethan, you hit it right on the head. And so many people that I've talked to that are in the auto business, whether it's journalism, reviews, whatnot, they all agree. Really, the best family vehicle isn't an SUV, it's a minivan. You're going to have more leg room. You're going to have more cargo capability. You're going to have more comfort. You're going to have better, generally speaking, better driving mannerisms. The only thing you're giving up is a little bit of ground clearance. And even then, how often are people utilizing the ground clearance on their SUVs?
Very rarely. I mean, I remember a Toyota Highlander commercial, maybe in like 2007, and they were basically just making fun of minivans. Like the auto industry is kind of doing this. They've really kind of created the stigma that minivans are bad, maybe because there's more money to be made in SUVs that get terrible gas mileage. I'm not really sure, but it is, and obviously people are not buying them. Even some of the really good ones don't sell very well. So, and it's interesting. You look at, like, remember the Mazda 5, which is like a minivan. You park that.
I love those.
You park that next to like a new CX-5, and you're like, oh wow, the Mazda 5 is just way more useful in every single way. Like just the packaging of how much stuff you can fit in there. The wheels aren't ridiculously large. Who's taking their CX-5 off road? Like 3 people are doing that.
I don't have children, and I almost bought a Mazda 5 because it has that capability to carry more people. If you have friends or family visiting, you have more cargo capacity in the back, and you could get it with a manual transmission.
Yep.
And it was just a very kind of niche vehicle. And I'll admit I have a soft spot for those two. I've never owned a minivan, but one of these days, like a nice Mazda 5, or I'm still a big fan of the old Aerostars. Find a nice old Aerostar, get one of the ones with all-wheel drive. I think that would be a fun little, mild overlander. You're not necessarily going to go up Moab with it, but you
Sure.
get yourself a little Aerostar all-wheel drive. Just put some beefy tires on it, maybe pick it up a little bit.
Yep, my friend bought my old Toyota Previa All-Track, which was all-wheel drive. It was not the supercharged version, so it was very slow. But he did the same thing. He lifted it, put some, he's not going any place nuts. He takes some dirt trails and that kind of thing. But if you don't care about crash tests or surviving a crash, Previa is a great minivan to go with.
Those have such a cult following, and
yeah, they're cool.
If for no other reason, you could say, "Hey, I've got a mid-engine car. Check this out."
It's a supercar.
Yeah, mid-engine. Well, we rambled a little bit from the topic here. We're talking about the Lexus LM. EKG Canadian loves it. If anybody in the chat, that's wants to chime up, now's your time. Let us know. It's not coming to the United States. Not coming to North America.
No.
Should Lexus bring the LM over here? Well, jump in and let us know. We can circle back around to this topic here.
Totally. So
and now we need time to get some of our viewers back after showing the LM.
Everybody,
but I love the LM. I think it's fantastic that vehicle even exists. That I like
it. It's interesting. Anyway. It's interesting and it's unique and it dares to just be what it is, and I respect that.
Yeah. So next up, let's talk about the Volkswagen ID.7, which is another vehicle that debuted at Auto Shanghai. I'm going to have to move back a few photos here because they've been running in the background. But anyway,
this one will be in North America. I think
this one will be. Yes, it sure will.
Late this year or early next. Do we know that exactly, Bruce?
I believe it's early next year. Let me double check that. Believe it's early 2024.
Okay, early next year. So I think production starts late this year. Two versions, the ID.7 Pro and the ID.7 Pro S.
And the Pro S is coming later. The Pro is going to come first, and then the Pro S is going to come. It's going to arrive in Europe and China first, and then North America early-ish 2024. Anyway, this is what Volkswagen is calling their new flagship. They are kind of positioning this as the replacement for the Phaeton. And I say that because they are directly comparing this to the Phaeton, especially its air conditioning system, which sadly I have never ridden in a Phaeton. I want to someday, but it apparently had these mechanized air conditioning vents that could move back and forth, up and down. And the ID.7 has taken this technology and kind of taken to an even farther generation. So it will also have that kind of technology
That's interesting that they're like, sorry about that. That's interesting that they're referring to the Phaeton, because I wonder if anybody in the general car buying public remembers that car. I mean, we do, but
I think you're right that I don't think that the general car buying public does, but I bet there are a bunch of car nerds like us that say, oh, this has Phaeton inspired technology. This is the next step from the Phaeton. And I wonder if they're kind of hoping that word of mouth helps this vehicle.
I mean, I think just an association isn't a bad step here. I mean, I agree. There are probably a lot of people that may not remember everything about the Phaeton, but I think they still associate it, or there might be an association with, okay, that was something, fairly upscale for Volkswagen. And now here's the ID.7 kind of going in that same direction.
Right. Because I think it's worth saying that the Phaeton and this look nothing alike. They don't share a name. They're just kind of saying, hey, this is Volkswagen's new flagship sedan. Volkswagen's last flagship
remember
sedan
that
was the Phaeton.
Flagship that didn't sell very well? This is going to sell better, we hope.
But that was also kind of amazing. It
was totally. I'm not saying it was a terrible. It was a really cool car.
Yeah. So, Ethan, I'm going to go off on a tangent here.
Sure.
There's a writer named William Gibson. He kind of created the term cyberpunk, but in the 2000s, he did this trilogy of books where it was called the Boo Ant trilogy. And it was about this really kind of douchey business owner and kind of the people that worked with him, but all of his cars were Phaetons. All of the company cars were Phaetons because he thought
Nice.
that was like what you would take people in.
Sure.
And it's very much an early 2000s car. And in that same book, like they talk about the Apple Cube, the Mac Cube.
Oh,
I don't
yes.
know if you remember those.
Yeah, I remember that.
Wow.
It's all of that kind of same generation of technology.
Yep.
That, yeah.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
that's what it makes me think of. That, you know, maybe it wasn't the best, but it was damn interesting.
It was neat for the time. And J Ferrari 427 chimes in. I remember the Phaeton. I think it was a 12-cylinder, if I remember right, back in 06, I think.
I think you get it with the W12, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a 12.
The W12 was still a 12-cylinder.
Yeah.
And I think the time frame
was
right.
available with the W8, and then I think you could get the Phaeton with the W12, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I believe that is correct as well. I'm not a super Volkswagen pro. But speaking of Volkswagen Pro, that was a terrible segue.
Good
it was a good segue.
That was terrible. That was terrible. ID7 Pro and Pro S. Those are the two trim levels. Whichever one you want, you're going to get a single motor with 282 horsepower. The Pro is going to give you an 82 kilowatt hour battery. The Pro S gives you a little bit more battery, 91 kilowatt hours. That translates to obviously a little bit more range for the Pro S. 435 miles on the WLTP cycle, which, as we all know, is a pretty generous cycle. 382 miles for the Pro with a smaller battery. Again, that's the WLTP cycle. We don't have anything yet for North America or for US as far as the EPA range ratings. Usually we're seeing them kind of drop down. So if we're looking at 435, what, Bruce, you say maybe 380, 370 in there somewhere, maybe?
I'm muted. Sorry. 390 was the number in my head. But
yeah. So I mean,
right around there.
It should be a pretty decent figure coming in at this level. We talked about the air conditioning.
It does look nice. I agree.
Yeah.
It's not a bad looking vehicle.
Yeah, it's elegant. I like the rear end a lot. Yeah.
Right. No, I think there's real potential there as long as they don't price it, way out of its range.
I do have a question though. I think that the question a lot of people might have is, what's the infotainment like? Is it the same system that it's in the ID, the ID4, the same system that's in the van? Because a lot of people have some pretty major problems with that. I wasn't able to see in the photo what kind of infotainment it's got.
Well, it's not
for you.
I don't think it's like the ones that people have been talking about. You talk about like the Volkswagen where, okay, I'm trying to change the radio or something, and I hit the turn signal, things like that. It's going to be different than that.
Yeah, I was talking about like the center stack. When I tested the ID4, there was some severe usability issues. It looks similar, but maybe hopefully they've fixed some of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. This is a 15-inch display in the middle. That's what I know about the specific.
Sure.
Just that design there for the middle, the 15-inch display. And then it has the smaller displays going on there. It's got the augmented reality setup, which I think is kind of neat because it shows different information on the windshield in like different spaces. So you get the impression some things that are further away, they look further away, nearer, like the speed is a little bit nearer. What am I missing, Bruce?
Well, I was just going to answer Ethan's question, is that we kind of don't know the answer to his question, unfortunately. Is that we haven't driven one. They're not in production yet. I wish I could tell you, oh, this is better, this is worse, this is bad, this is good, but I can't yet because it's a vehicle that's not in production yet.
Sure.
And so they're just premiering it now. I just don't know.
Right. I will say, Volkswagen paid attention to the criticism on the Golf, and they updated that system.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. So maybe this is an improvement, but again, it's too soon to say because this vehicle hasn't even entered production yet. So we just have to wait and see.
Sure. might be worth giving them the benefit of the doubt. Ted Adam Green, longtime Rambler listener, we're happy to have you with us here live. Maybe not quite so optimistic about Volkswagen. Ted says the issue with VW is that for the most part, it is a brand for those in the know. No mass appeal to the usual American buyer. Many are good cars, GTI especially, but still it remains a niche brand. And this doesn't move the needle at all. Whew,
Yikes.
Ted, that's
ouch.
That's a take, man. I guess I don't really have a direct answer or response for that. I think it has potential to move the needle. Like I said, it comes back to, okay, whether or not they price it correctly. And I think one of the issues they had with the Phaeton that we've been referencing here is that, okay, Volkswagen, they have this position in the market of being slightly, how should I say? They're not like the Audis. They're not the luxury brands in the market, right? So they come out then with the Phaeton, and it's kind of priced up there pretty close. It's like they're trying to extend into something, into a segment maybe that they shouldn't be in, or they shouldn't be trying to compete with. So I think that's why it's critical here for the ID7. If they're going to draw some comparisons with the Phaeton, great. Now let's keep it in the realm, that people feel more comfortable buying their Volkswagen in. And that's not to say it's somehow, inferior to another brand. It's just, that's what you're thinking of when you get a Volkswagen. And honestly, when we look at the powertrain, single motor, 282 horsepower, that's a fairly modest electric powertrain here. When you consider things like Tesla or, vehicles like Lucid, where you're getting the dual powertrains with just gobs of power. The impression that I get here is that, okay, if this is your powertrain, your powertrain choice, maybe they are going to keep this one a little bit lower down in the price range. I mean, Ethan, what do you think on this? Any thoughts?
It's hard to say. I'm sort of thinking about like how they positioned the ID4. That was they did try to keep the price down on that a little bit. You look at the performance of the ID4, it wasn't mind blowing. The interior was a little bit it wasn't cheap, but it was, you could tell where they were trying to save some cash. I could see them maybe trying to do that with this, especially considering it doesn't really seem to compete with Tesla in terms of power. So I would hope it would come in cheaper than a nice Model S.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we'll have to wait and see on, because we don't have any information yet on pricing. But I mean, we do know, as we were saying, should go into production late this year with availability starting next year. Bruce, I know you disappeared for a second because Cooper had a lot to say.
Well, Cooper and his cousin had a lot to say,
ID7.
and I apologize about that, folks. For anyone who's watching live,
no, Cooper's
Cooper's voice needs to
dogs. Cooper's voice needs to be heard, and I think that's very telling here with the ID7.
He's complaining about the infotainment. That's what he was complaining about.
Yeah. I know. So judging from our comments and judging from our partner Inside EV's comments from the story, a lot of people just think the ID7 kind of looks anonymous. Like they feel like, and again, this is just from the comments, that it doesn't have much personality, that it just kind of blends into the background. But again, we haven't seen one on the road yet. This isn't a vehicle that you could go into a showroom and buy. This isn't a vehicle that, you can configure yet online. So it's just kind of all early speculation. And so I wonder how that's going to work. What I will say is that I like that Volkswagen has a flagship vehicle again, that, the Passat, at least in the United States, languished for a while. The Passat had it was cool for a time. There are very cool Passats, and there are some not very cool Passats. So it's nice to see that there's going to be a vehicle that's going to take up that mantle. And we just kind of have to wait and see. And I know that feels like a cop out in a certain way, especially from any time someone's commenting on something that we have to wait and see. But I feel like it's true in this case. We don't know what this vehicle's priced at. We don't know the trim levels. We don't know, there's still a lot about this vehicle, especially in the United States, that we don't know yet. So we just have to kind of wait. But again, what I'm saying is it's cool that Volkswagen has a proper flagship sedan again.
And that they're trying to acknowledge it and move it in that direction.
Yes.
J Ferrari 427 says, at what point do you just pay more for an Audi? I think that's where people ran into issues with the Phaeton. It's like, well, if I'm going to spend this much, why don't I just go get the Audi? So that's why I'm very interested in the powertrain options that are being presented right now. I feel like this is going to come in substantially lower, but we'll have to wait and see. So stay tuned. More on this coming later on. Right now, actually, let's take just a little bit of a pause just to remind everybody, if you're catching us on Facebook, Motor1Com on Facebook, Motor1Com on Twitter, Motor1 on YouTube, you can comment. You can jump into the conversation here. You can comment live. We will see the comments live. We can all interact. We can talk cars. We can have a good time. And always, 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 anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 366 on leap years. Our email is open, podcast@motor1.com. We love getting the emails. We love reading them on air. We love sharing them with all of the listeners. Let's jump over to Lincoln Nautilus really quick because we've got a lot to talk about with Ethan yet.
We do.
And we have some really great stories that I know Ethan has queued up ready to share. Let's just go over Nautilus because this is a pretty substantial vehicle for Lincoln, I believe. Of course, the new Nautilus, it's their midsize SUV, completely new here. It's got a very clean, handsome exterior, just a nice, cleanly done exterior. Interior, that's where everything gets kind of crazy because you have dual 24-inch screens for driver and passenger spanning pretty much the entire dash. So you have, it's a 48-inch long screen going from side to side. It's a full digital makeover. You also then in the middle, you have like a little tablet style 11.1-inch screen. And I mean, it's a significant departure, I think, for Lincoln. And I think on the outside, I think this is a very attractive SUV. On the inside, I think it gets the job done on the inside. Underneath the skin, underneath it all, you get a 2-liter turbo 4. It's the same as the Corsair, 250 horsepower, 275 pound-feet of torque with an 8-speed automatic. Or you can go with the hybrid. That's a 2-liter turbo hybrid with the electric motor, 310 combined horsepower. That goes through the CVT. I think the big news here, I think, is on the inside, what Lincoln did with the inside, because it's a pretty big departure. It's also worth mentioning here, we do already have pricing information, and it is a little bit more expensive. You're going to pay a minimum now of, I got to bring it up here, $51,810. That's the starting price. And they have a configurator up at Lincoln. And if you option it out all the way, $83,580. Now that's for a fully optioned,
a lot of money.
That's a fully optioned Lincoln Nautilus black label with all the boxes checked. That includes the hybrid powertrain, the appearance packages. The black label, if you don't go with any options, is $75,860. And I will say,
that's still
the black label, it's a lot of money. But that's giving you just about all the options that you're probably going to want. The 2023 Nautilus, I believe, started at around 45. So it is a little bump in price, but you're getting a lot more on the inside with this Nautilus. I guess the question is, if somebody's looking at a $60,000 luxurious SUV, are they going to be looking at the Nautilus or something else? Right?
I don't know that they're going to be looking at this, if I'm being totally honest.
I mean, I would look at it just because it's a very striking exterior. and I really
It is.
dig that that big digital interior. Compared to other vehicles, other brands with their big digital makeovers like Mercedes, I think I like this a little bit better. It has a cleaner, simpler feel. In the Mercedes, I just feel like there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, even with their full digital setup. But our commenters are saying, I mean, J Ferrari 427 80K opens up a lot of doors that it does. But again,
does, man.
But I want to emphasize that's a fully optioned with every single box ticked. You can get into the black label for 76, and that's coming with all the snazzy leather.
Is a lot of money.
It is. It is.
Know.
But I mean, there are a lot of tricks in there. The Lincoln Rejuvenate system that combines sounds and smells with massaging seats. I mean, you're getting some neat luxury tricks in there. I mean, it's Lincoln. It's a luxury SUV, right?
Ethan, go ahead, man.
Well, I guess we have to. The last I checked, I think the average new car transaction price was like almost 50 grand.
Right.
It was like 48, 50.
It's high. Like it's high. It's between 45 and 50. Yes.
Yep. Okay, got it. Yeah. So when you think about that, you're trying to like reset our minds for where car prices are. 80 is a lot, but it's maybe not as much as we thought it was a few years ago. I think the biggest problem is just, what does the Lincoln brand mean to anybody? It's kind of sort of a similar problem to what Cadillac has right now is, what does this stand for? Yeah, it looks nice. It's elegant, has a nice looking interior, but they're not really answering the question why this stands above anything else from an emotional standpoint. It maybe a few features here and there might stand out as being really kind of unique. But yeah, I don't think a lot of people are like, oh, I have to go to the Lincoln dealer to see what kind of amazing things they have. Yeah, it's a good vehicle, but I think they really just need to work on what does this brand mean? And I think that if they answered that and had a good story around that, and I'm sure the story's there somewhere. I just don't know if they're telling it. That might bring more people to consider this brand. I know that they're not really selling a lot of Lincolns right now.
Well, Bruce, I mean, if you could pause it there, if you could pause our slideshow here on one of these, or maybe this image right there is a good one to pause on. And that gives us that gives us a good look at the interior, and I think that's just
it's
a slick.
Not bad. Yeah.
I think it's a slick looking interior. You have those big dual screens up front, but you still then have like a surface of the dash with another tablet in the middle. You get this weird kind of wraparound effect when you get into a new Mercedes with the glass cockpit. It almost feels like you're not in a car, but like a spaceship. And I'm a sci-fi guy. I mean, you see stuff behind me in my case. I'm a sci-fi guy. There are times when I want to get in a spaceship, but this feels a little more maybe welcoming, maybe less intimidating. Maybe that's what I'm looking for. It feels a little less intimidating because I still get the feeling like I'm in a car versus Tony Stark's new ship.
I mean, this design seems to really want to emphasize screens, almost, to me personally, almost as much as the Mercedes does, just in a different location. I think the aesthetic is very clean. You have a very, very nice straight lines. There's not a lot of, it's not too ostentatious, but in terms of, usability, stuff like this doesn't interest me that much, just because I feel like, in a lot of ways, what can we bring new to the table? Let's just add more screens and just add more like pictures. But how much of this is actually useful in day to day? In fact, I can't really tell from this picture like how many actual physical controls are still left here. But if you have to go to 7 screens to turn on the heat or something like that, that's not going to be good. It does seem like there's a few controls down there, but not many.
Yeah, I think Lincoln. I think Lincoln is doing a pretty good job of still keeping some basic controls where you don't have to, where everything isn't buried like 3 or 4 screens,
sure.
into a touch screen.
Yeah, and maybe for me, I'm obviously a fan of cars from the 80s and 90s. I obviously have no infotainment on a lot of my vehicles. But yeah, at some point, it just becomes distracting, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm opposed to is just, all of these screens where you're just kind of like looking down when you should just be paying attention to the road.
Mhm.
Especially like the wraparound screen where you're not really like, you can see things that are maybe designed for the passenger. I guess I'd have to see what their technology, how it's set up. So if those screens are turned off when you're moving or something. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
clean design, but I don't know. It's just not that interesting to me personally.
I mean, that's a good point. The way that's set up, I mean, it looks like you have to reach over, basically reaching over the top of the dash. If there are any touch control, touch functions on those screens, which I mean, I haven't had a chance to get inside, so I don't know exactly how it all functions.
Sure. I'd hope
Um,
there wouldn't be that far away.
yeah, I mean, I can see that certainly being some distraction. Ted Adam Green says, I think it's a noble attempt to define American luxury for a new generation instead of competing head to head with Euro Lux. Not saying it does it 100%, but good try. I think that's a really astute point because how many times over the last 20 years, Cadillac, have we seen an American automaker, Cadillac, try to emulate right down to alphanumeric names, European competitors, and possibly in the
Yeah.
process losing your brand identity. So I think that's maybe an astute point here. We have a luxury SUV that's not just trying to mimic what they're seeing from Mercedes, Audi, BMW, not just a name, but maybe an interior design as well. I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
What do you think out there, Ramblers? I know some of you are watching, and if you aren't catching us live, I'll say it one more time here before we move on. Podcast@motor1.com. That's our email. You can email us all of your thoughts. We will share them. We will read them on the air as long as they are PG or at least PG-13. But Lincoln Nautilus, and I mean it'll be on sale later this year. Pricing, like I said, starts $51,000 for the entry level model, which I mean you're still getting all kinds of nice equipment. You're getting like nice 19-inch wheels, comfy inside, new Lincoln Nautilus.
Yeah. So Ethan,
Yes.
It is time.
I'm gonna be really honest here. I feel like
Sure.
I've been a terrible host tonight because
Oh,
not only
sure.
has my dog been not really cooperating here,
Your
but
dog's
my
you
dog's
didn't
not
take me to
barking, so.
you didn't take me to China to see these. Come on.
exactly. But I feel like I have not necessarily been the best host tonight. But
Oh, no.
I super
I don't get that.
appreciate you
Yeah.
joining. No. I super appreciate you joining us. And
Sure.
I want to talk about you. I want to talk about what you're into. And that's what we're going to do for the final half of the show.
Sure.
So
That
you
sounds-
are behind the Hello Road YouTube channel. You're also a musician.
That's true.
And judging from your Instagram, you're quite a good photographer, or at least a better photographer than Smith and I. So,
Thank you.
so yeah, let's kind of start with things there. Where did your passion for cars come from?
For like a lot of kids, it was Matchbox cars, Hot Wheels cars when I
Yeah.
was a kid.
Yep.
If you asked my parents like what my favorite thing was, my favorite toy as a kid, they would have said, "Oh, that dirt pile in the backyard where I would make little towns and stuff with my Matchbox
Yeah.
cars." Spent a lot of time doing that. Way too much time. I also used to draw cars. I made up my own brands of vehicles and had like lineups and stuff. And
Oh, that's fantastic.
I had like a marketing hat on when I was a kid, which was really weird. I don't know if most kids are like passionate about marketing, but I was really into it. And
That's so
then,
cool.
I raced cars. I raced Spec Miata cars for a long time. I raced 24 Hours
Oh,
of
did you?
Lemons.
Okay.
Yeah.
What got you into that? Like, let's go down that road.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Western Massachusetts. There were a lot of back roads, and there was
Yeah.
a time when there wasn't a whole lot going on there. So we would occasionally drive too fast on public roads. And
I've
after
never
a while, I
done
was like,
that.
okay.
Nope.
After
Same
a while, I was
here.
like, okay.
Never in rural Michigan. Nope.
No.
I'm
Never
a
happened.
good boy. I didn't grow up in rural Ohio and never did things in the winter that I shouldn't have.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, geez. I mean, there was some bad stuff. I mean, and I think I wanted to do that, but as I got older and hopefully maybe slightly more mature, I was like, okay, let me try to take some of this stuff to the racetrack. And I had never been on a racetrack before. And I was like, I'm going to buy a race car. It was the stupidest thing. I just had a little bit extra money. I had a decent job, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this. So I bought a race car. And the first time I was ever on a racetrack was the first time I was ever in a race car. It was terrible. I did awful. I had a coach try to help me around the track. I slowly got better, and I became a solid mid-pack driver. And then
there's nothing wrong with that. Being mid-pack is you're not the best, but you're not the worst. That's fine.
I was happy with that. Yeah, and then you moved on to 24 Hours of Lemons. If you're familiar with, you might be familiar. You might have seen making the rounds. Picture of Liam Neeson. Might have made it to Reddit a couple times. That's our team name. It's basically.
I've seen that one. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's basically a Nissan 200 SX with a bunch of pictures of Liam Neeson on it. It's a terrible pun.
I don't think it is. I think it's a great pun.
That's what Lemons is all about, though.
Exactly. And on the very back, we found this picture of Liam Neeson where he was basically wearing a jean jacket. He had nothing, no shirt. He was wearing no pants. He was covering his private area with his hands. This was I'm sure at some point the photographer was like, this is going to be great for your career. And obviously it was. But we put that picture on the back of the car. So that way when other drivers come to us, or when we pass other drivers, they see that, and hopefully it kind of slows them up a little bit and causes them to not pay attention to what they're doing. It helps us in the race. So, yeah.
Are you still doing that, or have you moved on?
I still have the vehicle. It needs a new engine. We have a bit of work to do on that, but on
that front, and apologies if I bump things along a little too quickly here. You have quite a few cars right now.
Yeah, I don't
like 13 or so, something like that.
I feel stupid because it's like when you get older, you don't know how old you are. You kind of forget. I'd have to count them to know how many cars I have, which is a terrible, terrible thing. I think it's 13 at the moment. So I think part of it was the justification was I started this YouTube channel because I wanted to immerse myself in the automotive world and just say, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I want to just insert myself into this world and see if I can make some money doing it, make a living doing it. So part of that, I can justify making these purchases for the channel. But I've also always kind of had a problem buying cars, usually cheap ones, but
yeah,
right. Of course.
You and I, just a little background. Long before I went to Motor1.com, I was doing a little series for Winding Road called Flip This Car.
Okay.
Because I have a cheap car addiction.
Yeah.
And it started just I bought an 89 Taurus show. This was in 1999. I was like 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah.
Which was getting kind of old back then. It's not really so much now. But it was like, okay, well, I did a little bit of work. I fixed it up. And I'm in Michigan. I was like, I don't want to drive this in the snow. So now I got to go find a cheap winter car. And my wife was like, you have a car. You don't need another one. I'm like, just relax. I'll make this work. And then in the spring, I drove that. What was it? I think it was like a 93 Dodge Spirit that I bought for $400. It did a little bit of work to the engine, cleaned it up pretty good. I'm pretty good with detail, paint correction, some minor body work. Sold it in the spring for like $1,400. And I think I had about 800 or 900 in it. So I made a little bit of money. And then she's like, can I have a winter car too? I'm like, yeah, you can fix it up with me and everything.
Yeah.
So that led to me owning 33 cars in the last 20 years or so.
Okay. Yeah.
But from your YouTube channel, I think you've had more, haven't you?
I think I'm over 50 now. I'm not exactly sure. But a lot of them were within the last 5 years. So
but I mean it's addicting, right? I mean
sort of. I mean, it's also kind of terrible.
Yeah, but I mean explain the addiction part.
I just really enjoy experiencing lots of different vehicles. I think that's part of it. When I was a kid, I wished I had a car that could transform from a van to a sports car. I always wanted to be able to have a different car to drive every day. And today, I drove 3 cars today. I did one errand with one car. I did another errand with another car. So I do like just having different cars for different occasions. And I think part of my experience with the cars and, I think what I've really enjoyed about them is, or what I really try to do with vehicles is try to make sure all of my car experiences are fun and not, if I'm just going to commute somewhere, I'm just going to take my wife's Prius. You know, if it's going to be a boring, crappy drive, I don't really care what I'm driving. If I'm going to be stuck in traffic, it doesn't matter. But if I'm on a canyon road, or if I'm on a dirt trail somewhere, or if, you know, I've got some open stretch of asphalt, I'm definitely going to want to have something that's interesting, something that will give you a little bit more of a story behind where you're going. You know, but you know, I live in Los Angeles, so there's a lot of times where I'm like, just take the Prius. We're going to be stuck on the 405. I just want to have an anonymous, boring appliance. So yeah, I think it's kind of nice having a selection of those things where, you know, where I don't have to, if I just had a Prius, I'd probably be pretty miserable, but it has its place.
That's, and I mean, you make a nice point there that I want to highlight. Because I hear a lot from enthusiasts railing against like various driver assist systems, electric cars, and the future of motoring. How, oh, you're not even going to be a driver; you're just going to sit in there and be a passenger. And you know what? Even the most diehard enthusiasts at some point just want to get there. Right? Okay. Not every single driving experience needs to be the most memorable thing in the world. So, I mean, when you talk about, I'll just get in the Prius and go. If I was still living in Southern Michigan, commuting 30 plus miles or so into Dearborn or into Detroit on I-94, give me just the quietest, simplest car with ultra blue co-pilot cruise, whatever you want to call it, where, hey, you know what? Oh, here comes traffic backing up again. I'll just let the car handle it. You know, that it's fine to be that way. And I think it's fine to feel that way.
Sure. Yeah.
But tell us about some of the cars that you take out for fun.
Okay.
Wait,
so the
can
thing
I ask a question?
Oh yeah, go right ahead. Yeah.
Sorry,
sure.
Bruce, I'm monopolizing here.
Nope, you're good.
I found another cheap car person to share an addiction with.
Wait, I know, man. But Ethan, you owned one of my dream cars, which is a 1986 Porsche 944 Turbo. My dad had an 88 944S, so non-turbo, but when a little bit of a power bump, and then the S2 and stuff came out after that. So why did you get rid of that car? Because to me, a 944 turbo, is like, that's, you know, that's the king of the mountain in terms of that model. Like,
yeah. You need to explain why you got rid of that now that Retro Cars Forever, aka Brad Hansen, is here.
Sure. Also, yeah, and he's seen that a few times.
And
hey, Brad,
I want to add that I watched your video of it, and you kept saying, "Why am I selling this car?"
Sure, so I do that with every car.
Sell that car.
I do that with every car. Okay, so the story with this vehicle is I bought it with a friend. We co-owned it, although my friend Brad Brownell, I'm sure you're probably familiar with him. He wrote for Jalopnik.
Yeah, I know Brad. Yep.
Yeah. So we basically went halvesies on this car. It was $7,000. We paid $7,000 for this car but I think the reason why it was so cheap, I mean, at the time, 944 turbos weren't really like going up in value. They were still kind of not really like, I mean, they're great cars, but just not on like 911 status, obviously. So, but the thing with this vehicle is it had at least 400,000 miles on it. So there were,
I don't know if I knew that. Yeah. That's a lot of miles on a 944.
It is. So yeah, it could have been more than that because the previous owner had said that the odometer had stopped at some point, but the odometer said like 380 something. So it had a lot of miles. I don't know much about the history. I don't know if the motor was ever opened up. It didn't seem like it was. So I think the thing is, yeah, it's such an amazing car with, you know, almost 50-50 balance. The engine is great. It's old school turbo where, you know, you have like no power until about 3,000 RPM. Then it just takes off. I mean, it's a complete dog off the line, but all of the sounds are amazing. This one had a blow off valve that sounded like a bird chirping, which was just, I love the sounds. The Magnaflow exhaust, you know, I think Brad was behind me one time when we were driving up Angeles Crest or one of those roads. We were going through a tunnel and flames shoot out of the tailpipe. There's so many good things about this vehicle. It sounds amazing. It handles great. But it was so costly to run because it was, you know, it's an old Porsche. Porsche parts are not cheap. Like I had to buy a coolant overflow tank. And you can get one for a naturally aspirated 944 for a couple $100. The turbo was like almost $600. So those things start to add up. You know, it overheated several times. Needed a new radio. I upgraded to a bigger radiator. So many things happened. I was going up Angeles Crest, and right as I got to Newcomb's Ranch, where all the people were hanging out, blew a coolant line and just spewed coolant everywhere. So like, I think, okay, I don't know if I never made a video about this part, but I should, because I calculated the cost per mile on this vehicle. It cost me $5 per mile to run this car.
Oh my God.
So there's a couple things. Number one, I didn't drive it enough. That's probably part of the problem, but I didn't drive it enough because it was kind of always broken. So I hope I didn't I don't want to make like a never meet your heroes kind of thing, but yeah, you might not want to meet this hero. Or get a low mile one. I mean, it was one of those vehicles where I enjoyed it, even though it like beat my soul down. It was such a fun car to drive, but it was just really hard to keep putting that much money into it.
Well, being a Subaru owner, you might appreciate this little quick story I'll share. One of my heroes is the first gen Legacy Turbo.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
cool.
But you owned one of those.
I did. Like Colin McRae, Manx Rally. I had visions of doing all of this. I broke like one of my own cheap car challenge rules. Never fall in love with a car before you look at it. And then I broke the second rule. Never buy a car that's leaking fuel at the spot where you're looking at it.
And
it was like,
man.
It was like, okay, it's a little rusty, but I can save it. And I love this car. And it was a 91 Legacy Turbo. The shifter, the bushings in the shifter were shot, so I didn't even know what gear I was in. I was like, I can replace, that's just a rubber fuel line that I could, no, it wasn't the rubber fuel line. It was the steel. It was the steel up in there. And I bought it for, I think I paid $800 for it, with visions of just being Colin McRae, and it was so rusty underneath, I couldn't even take it apart. And I spent like 2 months with it, debating. It's like every other day I would go out and just crawl up underneath it and look, okay, let's just put a little bit more of this JB Weld stuff on this patch to see if the fuel leak stops. And then I drove it. I mean, I drove it maybe like 5 or 6 times, and then I finally sold it. But I know exactly how you feel with the Porsche, because that's how I felt, I think, with the Subaru. It's like, I want this car in every possible way, but it just can't happen. And I had it for like a couple months and sold it.
Yeah, I think that's the problem that I have with vehicles, is that I get this idea in my head of what I'm going to do with it, or what types of places I'm gonna go with it. It's actually, if you have the cash, it's really easy to buy a car, but once you get it, you're like, okay, I just bought myself a whole boatload of problems,
Yep.
and then you always find more than you accounted for. And then when you have all these problems, now you have to figure out a way, well, if I'm done with this, how do I sell these problems to somebody else if I want to get rid of the car? Because, every used car somebody's getting rid of it because of some issue, generally speaking.
Exactly.
So yeah, I never made, I just bought a car last week, so I never managed to talk myself out of it.
What did you buy?
Well, maybe we could talk about some of the more interesting ones. I literally bought the most boring vehicle I could think of. I bought a 2005 beige Nissan Altima because it was like almost free, and it was a manual, and I thought,
okay, so now it's getting more interesting.
It's sort of like I had this idea in my head that I was going to make a video with it, where it's kind of like a really cheap Pimp My Ride kind of thing. I was going to like paint it pink and put some fancy wheels on it. But
2005, is that still the older style where they were smaller, or is that the larger one with the V6?
It's the newer style. The newer style came out in 2002, which apparently was kind of saved Nissan at the time. So this 2005, so it's the kind of the newer one, and it's not the V6. It's the 2.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like fun, but
it's still gonna be
fun.
Hey.
Yeah.
I bought a 99 Chevy Metro 3-cylinder 5-door, and I specifically wanted the 3-cylinder because it's like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go with the 3. I don't want the 4.
No, of course.
Just to commute back and forth to work. And I thought it was going to be the most boring thing ever, and I loved it. And
there's
I can't
something to
explain why.
well, there's something about like a cheap car that you don't really care about too much. So this Altima, I like driving it. It's not fast. The shifter is actually, and the transmission is pretty nice. It's very roomy, and it's also just like a piece of garbage. So I can park it anywhere. I don't care about it.
All right.
You know, um, yeah. But that's like the most boring car I've bought in a very long time. I did just import something from Japan, which is the first time I've ever imported a vehicle.
Ooh.
It's
tell us more.
so this is
or is this
Yep.
something we need to see on your YouTube channel? I
No,
don't want to.
I posted
We
a
got to
video
tell
about
people
it.
to go to your YouTube
Yeah.
channel.
Yeah, I actually haven't posted a video about it. I did post a picture on my Instagram, but it's a 1993 Toyota Chaser.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So you've never sold here. It's related to the Cresta, the Toyota Cresta, and the Mark II. So it's a JZX90, which it just looks like a Camry kind of, or like a Cressida, you know. I don't know why I bought it.
Turbocharged inline six.
Yes, so it's a 1JZ. You know, I figure whatever was the maximum amount of horsepower that they were able to rate something at in Japan that year was like 276 or 280 or something like that. It's got that, but some people say that they underrated it, and it's actually got a lot more. It's very quick. It's stupid looking because it looks like it should be a drift car, and I'm not a drifter by any means. I just wanted the experience of importing something to kind of see how that process went. But yeah, it was
wow, okay. So I've got a bunch of questions for you, actually.
Sure.
So first off, how did that process go? But also, you are, in addition to being a car guy and a photographer, you are a musician. And as anyone who's watching this right now, you can see a bunch of guitars behind you. And I have looked at your SoundCloud page and things like that.
nice.
So I'm conflicted. So
sure.
tell me about the importation process, and then I want to know about kind of your musical process. Or is there any automotive inspiration that you take from music, or is it just purely, is it two kind of separate sides of your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, the import was, I'm not an expert in that. You can talk to a whole bunch of people that will give you a lot better, vision on how that works. I used a broker to buy it from an auction. I used a broker to bring it over and to get it on a ship, and to get it off the ship and all the paperwork and that kind of thing. But it was just very interesting, the whole process, to see how it went. It took a very long time. It took like almost 5 months, the whole process.
Wow.
But it's a cool car. Yeah, in terms of music, I've been a musician my whole life. I've recorded some albums, I've toured a little bit. And I think the things that might be related in some way are kind of the era of choice of the instruments and the things that I like to use. So, obviously I'm like 80s and 90s cars. I think a lot of that is just comes out of nostalgia and just, the feeling you got when you saw these cars as a kid. And I think the same thing holds true for like a lot of the synths. I have a couple synths here. I have an Oberheim synth that is from like 1986. I will never get rid of it. It sounds amazing, and it just brings you back right to that time.
Do not get rid of that.
No,
they are so hard to find now.
Sure. Yes, exactly. And a lot of them aren't in very, very good shape anymore. But yeah, in terms of the type of music I've been doing lately, it is does sort of have like a synth wave vibe to it, where it kind of has a lot of those the 80s nostalgia. So I would say that's probably the connection there. There really isn't a whole lot of connection to cars in general, but more of the connection of the era. Yeah.
So I also have passions. I also enjoy the synth wave kind of that sound.
Sure. Yeah.
So I kind of really got introduced to it from there's a YouTuber called This Is Dan Bell. The guy's named Dan Bell, and he does
he's great.
He does like abandoned malls and stuff like that. But then he overlays that with kind of that very synth late 80s sound.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I really got into that. And it's just an interesting thing, and it's an interesting sound. And it has nothing to do with cars necessarily, but
if you like cars from that era, it kind of brings you back to that.
Exactly.
And the interesting thing about like vaporwave and synthwave and a lot of those types, there's like a whole aesthetic. There's a visual aesthetic. There's an audio aesthetic. A lot of that is some of this stuff is made by people that weren't even alive back then, and it's sort of their imagination of how things sounded or how things look. You look at a lot of vaporwave and synthwave stuff; it's sort of like really exaggerated the aesthetic of what I remember as a kid. And in fact, when I thinking about growing up in the 80s and 90s, a lot of what I remember was just the continuation of the 70s, especially in like basements, like wood paneling and old TVs and stuff. Like not everybody had like those crazy Fresh Prince of Bel-Air graphics in their bathroom. It was like in their bedroom. No one did. It was basically the 70s continuing because it just,
or it's the 80s. It was like my grandmother still had wood paneling in her bedroom.
And you still had like the yellow or green refrigerator, that kind of thing.
The green fridge.
Yeah.
Or like
there are some memories.
Called Z brick, the fake brick that they would kind of put up. Like I knew people with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it wasn't of my time, but I experienced it because like I was a kid at the time and someone who was far older than me put that up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just think it's fun to, especially when bringing it back to cars. One of the reasons why I got into like cheap, I was really a big fan of like those cars that you forgot about. I've always was kind of looking for those vehicles that I remembered as a kid, but you just don't see anymore because they were just appliances. They were just A to B cars, and once they got too expensive to fix, they got crushed. So that's one of the cars. The first car I ever put on my YouTube channel was a 74 Datsun B210 because I found one for sale. It was brown, and it just reminded me of being a kid. It reminded me of like a time when those still existed, when those were still everywhere. Same thing with the Nissan Stanza wagon. I had one of those for a while, which is basically a Nissan Prairie in the Japanese market. It was the same thing where I remember seeing those as a kid, and then they just disappeared. And I really enjoyed like the having something like that and having the memories come back. It's obviously it's taking you to a time that no longer exists, but it is kind of fun to have like a little like museum piece or a time capsule that you can experience for a little bit of time.
What immediately makes me think of that is that you just did a video about a Daihatsu charade, which I remember in my neighborhood. I would just about every night I would go walk around my neighborhood and I'd see friends and whatever. But there was someone, I don't know who, some adult somewhere who had a Daihatsu charade, and it was so fascinating to see your video on it because knowing now as an adult, it was such a rare car. Like there are probably fewer of those than there are a lot of Porsche models that we were just. I bet you there are fewer Daihatsu charades in the US than there are Porsche 944s. I think I could put money down on that.
Absolutely.
And it's just fascinating in that way that like these forgotten brands, models, stuff like that they were around, and
rare but not valuable. That's kind of like what I enjoy. It's those cars that are rare that are not valuable.
I will have a Renault Le Car one of these days.
Those are great.
I remember two of my friends in high school buying one that ran just to like use it like a four-wheeler to just beat it up. I think they went out on it together and paid $50 each.
Yeah.
for this Le
Car. Speaking of the Le Car, so my dad I was born in 85. So when my mother was pregnant with me in 85, and then the next year in 86, they went to the Detroit GP, which was the Formula One race at the time. Mm-hmm. But the support race was with Renault Le Cars, Renault 5s. And so like he has this memory of seeing Renault Le Cars drive around Detroit. And it's just,
that's awesome.
It's so funny that that's what existed at the time. Like, and one of the memories I have, the one time I went to Road Atlanta, and so this would have been in the like the 2012-ish, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a one make series for Volkswagen Jetta diesels. They call it the Jetta, the Diesel Cup, the Jetta Diesel Cup,
Oh,
something like that.
I
And
don't
they
remember
raced
that.
those around, and I got to see those one time, and they sold like, commercial versions of those vehicles. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Huh.
I don't remember that specifically. If I could hijack the discussion here just for a moment, I want to
Do it.
Go for it.
just take a look, and everybody that's listening, you really need to check out Ethan's channel, Hello Road, on YouTube.
Indeed.
I'm looking at it right now. Retro cars, new car reviews, travel, and you go through and you see a Civic Type R review, the previous gen, followed by Charade, the Econobox you forgot about, the Daihatsu Charade. You've got the rad Toyota Previa in there, and then you get down here, Blazer EV. I mean, the mix here is amazing, and I want to personally thank you for calling out the third gen Grand Am, but stopping short there. Regular rambling about cars listeners will know there are very few things that I hate in the world, but the fourth and fifth gen Grand Am is among them. It's just it's like one of those irrational things where it's like I don't really know why I hate them, but I do. But I think the third gen, they're from 85 to I think it's 92.
Yeah,
91
right.
or 92
91,
around there.
Yep.
Those they're just cool. So I want to thank you for that. What I really want to do though, you have a video. This is what I touched on here at the beginning.
Sure.
You made a video. I'm a car enthusiast that is starting to hate cars. Here's why. And we're having a good time talking about cars here.
Let's bring it down. Let's make everybody sad.
Well, no. I think I want to bring it up with this video.
Sure.
Because there's always a point in the life of a car enthusiast, and I think maybe this can translate to just about anything that anyone is passionate about. There comes a point where it's just like, I don't really want to do this anymore, and that can be really depressing because it's like, this is what I love, or this is something that I love, and now I don't want to do it anymore. And you talked about it, which is something that a lot of people don't do. So bravo there. And two, you raise some very, very strong points that I think helps other people understand, hey, you know what? I'm not really liking this that much either, but it's okay. I think I understand why. I mean, you kind of sussed it out to where you have a lot of cars and you just don't really have the time to use them, and they're expensive, and that can be kind of a downer, right?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a couple facets to this. I mean, I think the first thing is like, okay, I'm a YouTuber. I bought a lot of cars to try to make content with, and in behind the scenes, it's really difficult to manage a fleet of vehicles. Even if it is for a small business. So, I think that's part of it. I sort of also realized like I have all these vehicles that I don't really love working on cars, especially when there's a lot of projects going on. I kind of more appreciate having one project that I can really understand and really get to know in detail. But when you have a bunch of cars, not many people are going to have that same experience, I don't think. But I think part of the reason why I was starting to kind of hate cars was really kind of just a lot of the things that you think about, but maybe you try to ignore when you have a car. You think about, okay, well, there's obviously cars have allowed us to get places quickly in many cases, but there's a lot of downsides. There's environmental downsides. There's traffic downsides. There's I think when I started to look into those types of things, I kind of realized if I could define how I view myself as a car enthusiast, I realized that I'm a car enthusiast that hates car dependency. So I'm somebody that I really love to have great experiences with the vehicles. I want to go off-roading. I want to go on canyon roads. I want to go to a racetrack. I want to go on road trips. I want to travel with friends. But
you don't want to sit in traffic.
I don't want to be forced
beyond that though.
Yeah. I want to be forced to use my car for everything, because this is a new thing. Everybody is sort of just used to driving everywhere in the United States. But this is a relatively new thing where we're designing places to only be accessible via car. Anything pre-World War II, you could get around walking or biking, or there were ways to get around it a lot, and I think that's why a lot of pre-war places that were built are in such high demand now, because there's a desire to live in a place where you don't have to use a car for everything. And you look at some of the new developments that are being built now, and they're they have like all this circuitous like cul-de-sacs, and if you actually wanted to walk somewhere, it would take you like an hour and a half to get to your closest supermarket. We're building it this way where I that's what I've sort of come to realize, is that I don't want to have to do that, and it was only kind of a recent sort of discovery for me. I sort of always kind of knew that I don't really like being stuck in Los Angeles traffic. I don't really like living this far away from my job. I don't really like the fact that I have to drive everywhere.
Right.
But it never seemed like there was an alternative, just because my whole life, this was my reality. I looked at the place that I grew up in Massachusetts. Have you ever heard of the walk score? You can rate places based on what the walk score is. And the higher the
No, I
walk
haven't.
score, is, the easier it is for you to get around without a car. And the place that I grew up in had a walk score of 1. So it was basically the worst place to get around without a car. And I think where I live now is like 50 or something. So I could walk some places, but I think as I get older and start to realize that I hate sitting in traffic, I hate all of the external things that are bad about cars. We look at, like, I know I don't want to bring it down too much, but you look at how
No.
pedestrian fatalities have gone up like exponentially, not exponentially, but they've gone up a ton. If you look at back I think they haven't been this high since the 80s. So there's definitely some major issues with the way that we're building our cities, and the way, cars are getting heavier, they're getting more distracted, they have more distracting technology, the blind spots are way worse. Cars are much safer for the occupants now, but they're getting less safe for people outside of the vehicles. So those are all kind of the things that, like,
that's very true.
I'm just trying to figure out and try to like come to terms with. And this isn't like the title of my video is I hate cars, but it's really more that I hate car dependency, and I hate that that we have to live this way. And I think as car enthusiasts, we like experiences with the cars that are fun. We like experiences where we're not stuck in traffic, where we can actually use our vehicles for enjoyment. And if we actually spent some time and looked at our infrastructure and built it in a different way and made it so that not everybody had to drive everywhere, it would make driving better. A lot of people like to rail against bike lanes. They like to rail against, other types of infrastructure because they feel like it takes away space from cars. But if you can convert some of that space to other modes, then it could make driving more pleasant. So those are like a lot of the things that I've been thinking about. And I feel like as car enthusiasts, we should care about this stuff. We should care about, rising fatalities of pedestrians. We should care about, because we want to like, with a clear conscience, enjoy vehicles and know that we are, I think it's just in our best interest to think about these things and not to avoid them. And I will say this, after I made that video, I found out that a lot of car enthusiasts shared some of the same, views, and I thought that was great, because it sort of made me realize that I talked to a lot of car enthusiasts that take public transit a lot of places because they want their car experiences to just be fun, and they don't want to be
just be
stuck
good.
in the 405. Yeah, exactly.
Right. No, well, I mean, the reason I mentioned your video is because it spoke to me like loud and clear. I mean,
That's cool.
I've been in the auto industry in various aspects for 20 years. I've been an enthusiast longer than that. I literally live and breathe cars 12 hours a day, pretty much these days. And I'm burnt on cars. And it can be frustrating sometimes, and it can be tiring. I mean, I've got 3 cars, one which doesn't run, which is a project that I bought that I'm excited to work on and that I haven't touched yet. The other 2, the other is it's a 95 Mustang that, I mean, it runs and drives now. I need to do some work on it, but the garage is like 12 feet away, and it's 45 degrees, and I want to work in a t-shirt. It's just excuses. but I think the takeaway there is, we all experience that, and
Sure.
to kind of have it, framed up a little bit better. I think it speaks to a lot of enthusiasts, and I mean, yeah, we want our experiences to be good with cars, and when they're not good, it can make the good experiences just it can take away some of their luster.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So
Yeah.
I mean, that video, and yeah, your points on vehicles, just the size, the distraction. I have an 04 Subaru Forester that I just put in a double din touchscreen because I wanted CarPlay, some
Sure.
small token of modern amenities, right? And I mean, I've driven newer cars with bigger screen. It's all very distracting. It's extremely distracting, and it's a little distressing to me that there isn't more attention being brought to this. And I know the solution seems to be, we'll make everything voice activated. If you have a good voice system that could recognize you, I mean, yeah, that'll work. But between that and the larger vehicle sizes, you are not wrong there. And you have some great videos showing, I think you have like a 93 or 94 F-150 next to a new one. The size difference is crazy. New and old Toyota Tacoma size difference is crazy.
Well, and the funny thing about the Toyota Tacoma, so I had mine was a 2001 Tacoma 4-wheel drive, and we compared it to a 2022 4-wheel drive Tacoma, and guess which one had more ground clearance? The old one.
Yeah, probably the old one, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was a lot smaller on the inside, but it was funny to see like the bottom of the headlights on the new one came up to the top of the headlights on the old one. It's just much more of a substantial vehicle, and that's not obviously a Tacoma is not large, not as large as the F-150 Tremor that I compared to my F-150. That was a full 7 inches taller than my F-150.
Yeah,
and to the point where it's like it was actually not that useful as a truck because the top of the bed came up to my chin, and I'm 6'3", so like loading stuff into this vehicle, it sort of wasn't actually very useful as a
I know I'm not 6'3".
Yeah.
And it sucks. Fortunately, I can hop up into beds pretty good still.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, Ethan, I would. We could keep talking for another 2 hours. I know we're running a little bit long here now, but
we're running longish.
Bruce, you got anything to add here before we?
I do have a quick point, and I apologize for anyone who's watching. I keep rubbing my eyes. I don't know why, but my
dog
eyes
allergies
are really running right now. It probably is the dog because he's right here. Anyway, Ethan, you're making an incredibly good point, and what I want to say about that is that it's. I've been writing about cars. I started in 2011, I believe, and there are times where I feel guilty's not the right word. I feel conflicted about writing about cars because I understand the things that I am writing about are infecting our entire environment. But I also still have a passion for vehicles, whether they're electric, hybrid, just whatever. And it's a very, very complicated thing in my eye. And yes, I do have something in my eye, and I apologize. But anyway, I think we kind of have to shut things down for tonight because we're at almost an hour and 35 minutes
for sure.
or so.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you being with us. I wish I could have been a better host tonight, both because...
Oh, don't say that. This was great. Had a ton of fun.
On my own personal thing, I feel like I was a bad host, but Smith, you lifted me up. You did a fantastic job.
Oh, for crying out loud. Let's listen to this. Bruce is the one that really carries the show. He does all the producing and stuff in the background while he's talking. I just have to sit here and run my mouth.
Anyway,
which I'm very good at. But Ted Adam Green says, great guest, guys. Ted, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody that's been here in the live chat, go ahead, Bruce.
I linked to it in our post. Go check out Ethan's music. Your band or your project, it has a slightly different name, right? Go ahead and tell people that.
It's called State Shirt.
Yep.
I've been making music for a long time under that name. So you can find it on Spotify,
SoundCloud. That's what I linked
YouTube.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
it's
what
really
we're
good. Like it's
Thank
like
you.
an ambient electric. It's good. Well, let me
Thank
put it
you.
that way. I enjoyed it. I
Yep.
listened to it. I dug it. It's good for anyone out there. If you just want like kind of chill music to listen to, at least from what I heard, I'm recommending it to folks out there. But yeah, just very good. Ethan, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
And
thanks
as
for having me. I
always,
appreciate it.
and
uh,
what we'll do, let me just jump into really quick, Bruce. What we'll do
No,
for
man,
everybody
go for it.
listening, on YouTube, Motor One on YouTube, this particular episode, Rambling About Cars, we're going to have all the links to Ethan's, we'll link to Ethan's YouTube,
Yep. And his
Instagram, your
Instagram,
music
and
page.
yeah.
And Ethan, is there anything else you want to shout out here before we head out?
I don't think so. I just I'm gonna dream about that Lexus LM tonight, I think. So that's about it.
I hope not. I hope not. I've got some strong beverages upstairs that will hopefully erase that image.
Anyway, as always, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. We appreciate all of the people that tune in for our live show. That since Rambling About Cars has become a live show, but our audio show as well that still exists. If it goes up every Friday, and if you don't have time, go ahead and listen to the audio show. But we're still you can watch our video show. We love everybody. I love the fact that anyone who listens is willing to give us their time, because there are an infinite number of ways that you could spend time. You could watch, any number of TV shows, any number of podcasts, any number of audio shows, but you decided to spend time with us. So I super, super appreciate that. So with that, I think that's going to be our show tonight. And if you go to motor1.com, you can see all the links to Ethan's various stuff. So yeah. Good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Ethan, for joining us, and we'll see you later.